People in Richmond used to say that if kindness had a face, it would look exactly like Marjorie Hale. For years, she was the woman everyone pointed to as proof that there was still good left in the world. The soft-spoken, cardigan-wearing grandmother who never missed a Sunday service, never forgot a birthday, and never let a neighbor go hungry. Her house on Sycamore Lane was the kind of place folks sent their kids trick-or-treating first, because Marjorie always had the best candy and the warmest smile. From the outside, nothing about her life hinted at the storm that was building behind those pale curtains. If anything, she looked like the anchor of a picture-perfect family, 3 generations under one roof, living quietly, peacefully, almost beautifully. Her daughter, Camille, had moved back in after a painful divorce, carrying an 8-year-old boy who clung to her leg and wouldn't stop crying. That little boy was Tyrese, and from the moment he stepped into Marjorie's home, he became the center of her universe. Camille worked long hours at the urgent care clinic, overnights, double shifts, holidays, doing whatever she could to keep the mortgage paid and the lights on. And while she worked, Marjorie stepped seamlessly into the role of mother, teacher, cook, chauffeur, comforter. Tyrese grew up with the smell of lemon polish in the hallway, cornbread in the oven, and his grandmother's gentle humming drifting through the house. To him, she wasn't just grandma, she was safety. Neighbors still remember seeing them walking together every weekend. Marjorie in her pressed slacks, Tyrese holding her Bible as they made their way to First New Hope Baptist Church. They always sat in the second pew. She'd slip him peppermints during long sermons, and he'd rest his head on her shoulder during the choir's closing hymn. People whispered about their bond, calling it beautiful, powerful, rare. That boy loves his grandma more than life, they'd say, and it was true. At least, that's what everyone believed. She played the role so flawlessly that no one ever thought to look deeper. At bake sales, she remembered everyone's favorite pie. At school meetings, she was the grandmother teachers wished every student had. When someone lost a relative, she was there with a casserole by sunset. She was the one who organized canned goods at the food pantry and crocheted blankets for winter drives. Everyone trusted her. Everyone admired her. Everyone swore she was incapable of even raising her voice, let alone hurting someone. If there was a woman in Richmond who seemed beyond suspicion, beyond reproach, it was Marjorie. Tyrese, meanwhile, flourished under her watchful eye. Tall, polite, soft-spoken, he grew into the kind of young man people rooted for. He loved basketball, dreamed of playing in college, and had a smile that lit up his whole face when he let his guard down. Teachers said he was respectful and hardworking. Friends said he was loyal, and neighbors often joked that he was the boy every grandma wished they could borrow. What they didn't realize was that Tyrese rarely brought friends home. He always made excuses, practice ran late, homework was piling up, someone needed a ride. Nobody questioned it, because everything looked normal. Everything looked perfect. Even Camille, exhausted and stretched thin, didn't see anything alarming. She thought her mother was simply stepping up the way good grandmothers do. She thought Tyrese was just glued to his grandma like any child raised in a multi-generational home. And when she did feel something strange, a look that lasted a beat too long, a silence that made her chest tighten, she pushed it aside, telling herself she was imagining things. After all, this was Marjorie. Sweet, dependable, God-fearing Marjorie. The woman who had once worked 3 jobs to support her. The woman who never asked for anything in return. But perfection can be the most effective disguise in the world. And the more people admired Marjorie, the more invisible her shadows became. No one noticed how intensely she watched Tyrese at church, or the way her jaw tightened when girls his age smiled at him. No one saw how she always insisted on being the one to tuck him in at night, even when he was too old for it. No one questioned why she seemed threatened whenever someone else got too close to him. From the outside, Marjorie was the grandmother everyone adored. Inside the house on Sycamore Lane, behind doors that always closed too softly, something far darker was taking root. Quietly, patiently, dressed in the same comforting smile that fooled an entire community. And by the time the truth finally surfaced, it would be too late to ask how no one saw the monster hiding in plain sight. Most people in Richmond believed Marjorie Hale had been born kind, that she'd simply come into the world already gentle, compassionate, and anchored in faith. But the truth was far more complicated, buried under decades of silence, shame, and memories she would have rather died than revisit. Because long before she became the grandmother everyone adored, Marjorie was a frightened girl growing up in a house where love was something whispered about in church but never practiced at home. She came from a tiny town in rural South Carolina, a place where the smell of cigarette smoke clung to everything and secrets were tucked away like winter coats, kept out of sight until they suffocated you. Her father drank himself to sleep most nights, muttering curses at the world. Her mother clung to scripture the way drowning people cling to driftwood, reciting verses until her voice cracked. None of it made the house feel safer. None of it stopped Marjorie from flinching every time a door slammed or footsteps echoed down the hallway. By 15, she knew exactly how to disappear within her own home, quiet, obedient, unseen. But one afternoon, walking home from school, a neighbor she trusted offered her a ride. He wasn't much older, someone everyone in town called respectful, the kind of young man adults praised. When he put his hand on her shoulder, she froze. When he pushed her down in the back seat, she didn't scream. And when she got home afterward, trembling and numb, she didn't tell a soul. Girls like her didn't speak. Girls like her endured. Months later, when her belly began to swell, the truth came out, not of what happened to her, but what her mother believed. "This is God punishing you," she said, dragging Marjorie into the kitchen and forcing her to kneel on rice for hours until her knees bled. When the baby arrived, Marjorie didn't get to hold it, didn't get to see its face. A stranger from the next county took the newborn from her arms before she even had a chance to breathe. Her mother said it was for the best. A girl like you doesn't deserve to raise a child. That day carved something deep into Marjorie, something that never healed. A hunger, a void, a belief that motherhood was both sacred and fragile, something that could be taken without warning. She learned that if she didn't control love, she'd lose it. And for years afterward, she built her life on that lie. She left home as soon as she could, worked as a cleaner by day, and studied nursing at night. People admired her work ethic, her discipline, her devotion. No one knew she wasn't chasing success. She was outrunning her past. When she married Harold Hale, a quiet and patient man, she thought maybe she had finally escaped the shadows. For a while, she did. But life has a way of repeating its cruelties. Harold died of a heart attack when their daughter Camille was just 12, leaving Marjorie alone again, alone with a child to raise and a fear she could never admit out loud. She poured everything into Camille, molding her with rigid rules and expectations camouflaged as tough love. Camille grew up disciplined, respectful, and distant. No matter how hard Marjorie tried, her daughter never filled the hollow place inside her. That emptiness followed her through the years, becoming a quiet ache she carried everywhere. Then Tyrese was born. Marjorie held him in the dim hospital room, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead, and felt something inside her crack wide open. Here was a child who hadn't been taken from her. Here was a second chance, a chance to do motherhood right, to fix what had been broken decades earlier. But obsession doesn't announce itself. It crawls in slowly, disguised as devotion. And Marjorie, still haunted by the baby she lost at 15, wrapped herself around Tyrese like a lifeline. To the world, she was simply a grandmother loving her grandson. But deep down, tucked beneath every warm smile and church hymn, was the lonely girl kneeling on rice, clutching a wound that had never healed. And that wound, the one she never spoke of, would twist itself into something monstrous. It would turn her love into possession, her affection into control, and eventually her silence into a secret that would destroy them both. The tragedy didn't start on Sycamore Lane. It started decades earlier in a house filled with smoke, prayer, and the kind of pain that never stays buried. By the time Tyrese reached middle school, the bond between him and Marjorie Hale had already become something people in the neighborhood admired, something they envied, even. They saw a devoted grandmother raising her grandson with more patience and tenderness than most parents could muster. What they didn't see was how carefully, how deliberately that bond had been shaped. Grooming rarely begins with something shocking. It begins with small things. Innocent things. Things so subtle no one notices until the trap has already closed. It started with Marjorie insisting she and Tyrese had their routines. Their Saturday pancake mornings. Their Wednesday night movie sessions. Their evening walks around the block. Camille didn't question it. She was working long shifts, grateful her mother was so involved. And to a child, consistency feels like love, not control. Tyrese grew accustomed to the idea that his grandmother's presence was comfort, that her voice was truth, that her rules were the rules. As he got older, those routines became boundaries. Boundaries Marjorie controlled with gentle words and soft guilt. Don't stay out too late, baby. I worry about you. You don't need those boys from school. They only distract you. You and Grandma, we take care of each other. It's always been that way. Tyrese didn't hear manipulation. He heard devotion, and Marjorie made sure of it. By the time he was 14, she chose which friends he was allowed to spend time with. She checked his phone to make sure he was safe. She told Camille that Tyrese was sensitive, that he needed guidance, stability, structure. Camille, exhausted from double shifts, accepted that explanation without hesitation. She didn't see the warning signs, not because she was blind, but because Marjorie was a master at hiding anything she didn't want people to see. The affection grew heavier during Tyrese's teenage years. Hugs that lingered too long. Hands brushing his hair, his cheek, his shoulders for just a moment longer than necessary. Late nights, sitting together on the sofa, her arm wrapped around him under the guise of comfort. All framed as love. All framed as care. All quietly stealing pieces of his independence before he even understood what independence meant. The first time something felt wrong to Tyrese was a night he tried to go to a basketball game with friends. Marjorie told him she didn't feel well, said she needed him to stay. When he hesitated, she started to cry, soft, shaky tears that made him feel cruel for even thinking of leaving her alone. "Grandma only has you," she whispered. "You're my whole world." He stayed. And the truth was, he didn't even realize he'd made a choice. He thought he was being loving, thought he was being a good grandson. That's what grooming does. It bends love into obedience before you even know you're bending. At school, teachers noticed Tyrese pulling back. He stopped eating lunch with teammates, stopped talking as much, stopped signing up for after-school activities because Marjorie always had plans for them. When classmates asked why he couldn't hang out, he laughed it off. "Grandma needs me. Grandma worries. Grandma doesn't like when I stay out." Friends shrugged. Most grandmas were strict. No one assumed anything darker. But Camille felt something shift. One afternoon, she stepped into the living room and saw Tyrese sitting on the sofa while Marjorie stroked his hair slowly, rhythmically, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made Camille's stomach twist. He was nearly 16, too old for that kind of closeness. Camille opened her mouth to say something, but Marjorie glanced up, smiled sweetly, and said, "He had a long day. I'm just helping him relax." Camille forced herself to smile back. She blamed exhaustion, stress, overthinking, because the alternative, the possibility that something was wrong, was too frightening to confront. Meanwhile, Marjorie's grip tightened. She began slipping comments in a conversation, subtle but sharp. "Girls your age are sneaky, Tyrese. They'll break your heart. People only pretend to care about you. Grandma's the one who really does. You don't need anyone else." And Tyrese, who had been raised to trust her word as scripture, started to believe her, started to isolate, started to shrink his world to the size of hers. What made grooming so effective was not violence. It was gentleness. It was praise. It was dependency disguised as love. Marjorie convinced him he was special, that he was chosen, that their connection was deeper than anything he could have with friends, with classmates, even with his own mother. And Tyrese, kind-hearted, loyal, eager to make the woman who raised him proud, absorbed every word. By his junior year, he was a shadow of the boy he used to be. Quiet, Withdrawn. Always home. Always available. Always within reach. Exactly where Marjorie wanted him. And no one, not Camille, not neighbors, not teachers, not even Tyrese himself, recognized that the warmth wrapping around him was not love at all. It was a cage built slowly, carefully, lovingly long before he ever realized he needed to escape. The letter came on a Wednesday afternoon, slipped between a grocery store flyer and an overdue utility bill. Tyrese almost didn't notice it. It looked like every other envelope the county health department sent, plain, white, unremarkable. But something about the bold red stamp, that read confidential, made him pause. He opened it right there in the kitchen, barefoot on the cool linoleum, expecting nothing more than the routine results from the physical he'd taken for the basketball program. At first, the words didn't register. His eyes scanned too quickly, too casually. Your test returned positive for HIV-1. He blinked, reread the sentence. Then again, slower. His stomach dropped as if someone had pulled the floor out from under him. The paper slipped from his hand, floating to the ground like it weighed nothing, though it carried everything. HIV. The word echoed in his skull, pounded through his chest. It didn't make sense. Tyrese wasn't sexually active. He'd never slept with anyone. He never even kissed a girl. Marjorie had made sure of that. The only physical closeness he had ever known, ever been allowed, was with his grandmother. His breathing turned shallow. Heat crept up his neck. For a moment, he felt like he might faint. He stumbled into a chair and gripped the edges to steady himself, staring blankly at the refrigerator door covered with church magnets and old report cards. His mind replayed the last few months. Marjorie insisting he didn't need doctor visits. Marjorie tossing his mail by accident. Marjorie getting angry when he asked to join the school's health fair screening. His heart hammered painfully. She wouldn't. She couldn't. Would she? He spent the rest of the day in silence. That night, he didn't sleep. The next night, he didn't either. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of his life with her. Every touch, every whisper, every late-night comforting visit, now stripped of innocence. He felt sick in a way no medicine could fix. A betrayal that made his skin crawl. On Friday afternoon, while Marjorie volunteered at the church pantry, Tyrese did something he hadn't done since he was 8 years old. He walked in her bedroom without permission. The room was pristine, so clean it looked staged, as if untouched by time. But the drawers told a different story. He searched carefully. He didn't want her to know he'd been there. Beneath folded scarves and neatly stacked undergarments, he found it. A small wooden box he remembered from childhood. Back then, she said it held sewing needles. Now it held something far worse. He lifted the lid. Inside were medical files, yellowed, creased, stamped with clinic logos from Washington, D.C. dated more than a decade earlier. His hands trembled as he read the first page. Patient, Marjorie Elaine Hale. HIV-1 positive. Patient declined antiretroviral therapy. Counseling recommended. Tyrese's breath caught in his throat. His knees nearly gave out. She had known. She had known for years. And she still. He pressed a shaking fist to his mouth to smother a sob. It felt like his entire childhood collapsed in on itself. Like every memory he'd ever held. The warm breakfasts, the church Sundays, the bedtime humming, had been poisoned. Because they had. He sank onto her bed and stared at the document, his vision blurring. Rage burned in his chest. Grief followed. Then a strange numbness settled over him, cold and suffocating. After a long moment, he grabbed the envelope with his test results, flipped it over, and scribbled for words that had begun forming in his mind. Was it love or a cage? Then he crossed out the first half, underlined the second. A cage. Carefully, Tyrese photographed every page in the wooden box. Then he put everything back exactly the way he'd found it. Every scarf, every drawer, every piece of her carefully constructed life. When Marjorie came home that evening, she called out cheerfully, "Baby, I'm home." The same line she'd said every night since he was a child. Tyrese didn't answer. He sat at the dining table, the envelope in front of him, hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. His eyes were hollow, his voice icy when she finally approached him. You infected me. Marjorie froze. Tyrese lifted his gaze, and the pain in his eyes was something no teenager should ever wear. I got tested. I'm positive. And I found your records. For a moment, the world went silent. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. Even the air felt still. And then Marjorie did the most horrifying thing of all. She smiled. A small, broken smile, like she had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it, preparing for it. As if the truth wasn't shocking. As if the truth wasn't monstrous. She whispered, I never meant to hurt you. I only wanted to love you. To protect you. You don't understand how cruel this world is, baby. They would have taken you from me. Her voice trembled. Tyrese's heart broke in a way that felt final. You're my grandmother, he said, his voice cracking. And you destroyed me. For the first time in 18 years, he stood up to her. Told her he was going to call his mother. And then the police. That was the moment the mask finally shattered. And whatever lived behind Marjorie's gentle smile, whatever darkness she'd kept hidden for decades, rose to the surface with a violence he never saw coming. The truth hadn't just shattered Tyrese's world. It had awakened a monster. When Tyrese finally said the words, I'm telling Mom, and then I'm going to the police, it was like dropping a match into a room filled with gasoline. For a split second, Marjorie Hale just stood there, frozen in the dim kitchen light. Then something in her face shifted. Something small at first. A twitch, a soft tightening around her eyes. But it spread quickly, like a crack running across glass. The gentle grandmother Richmond adored simply disappeared. Tyrese stepped back, instinctively creating distance. But Marjorie moved toward him with a speed that didn't match her age. The smile she'd forced a moment earlier faded, replaced by a desperate trembling around her mouth. You can't, she whispered. Tyrese, baby, if you love me. I don't, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Not anymore. Those 3 words broke her. Her shoulders jerked as if she'd been slapped. Her breathing turned ragged, uneven. She stared at him not like a grandmother, not even like a woman, but like someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. Because for Marjorie, Tyrese was her world, her only anchor, her only possession. And the thought of losing him wasn't just painful, it was unbearable. She took one step back, then another, and that was when Tyrese saw it, the gleam of metal catching the overhead light. Marjorie had slipped into the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife they owned. Tyrese froze. Grandma, stop. But she wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes had gone glossy, wild, the way an animal looks when trapped. She clutched the knife with both hands, knuckles white, wrists trembling with adrenaline. I can't let you go, she choked out. You don't understand. They'll ruin us. They'll take you away. You're all I have, Tyrese, all I've ever had. Put it down, he said softly, raising his palms. Please. She shook her head violently. You were supposed to stay with me. You promised you'd never leave Grandma. You said I was your heart, baby. That was before, he whispered, tears forming in his eyes. Before I knew. Something snapped. She lunged. Tyrese barely had time to move. The kitchen filled with the sound of steel slicing air. The blade grazing across his shoulder, tearing through shirt and skin in one burning line of pain. He stumbled back, slamming into the doorframe, his hand instinctively going to the wound as blood warmed his fingers. Why are you doing this? He shouted. You were supposed to love me. I do love you, Marjorie screamed, her voice raw, unrecognizable. I gave you everything. Everything. And you want to throw me away like trash? After all I sacrificed. She came at him again, dragging the blade across the wall as she moved. Her bare feet slapped the floor, leaving faint red prints from where she'd stepped in his blood. Tyrese dodged around the corner into the hallway, heart racing, breath sharp. He had never been afraid of her, not once in his life. But the woman chasing him now wasn't the grandmother who hummed gospel songs or baked peach cobbler. This was someone else entirely, someone made of fear, rage, and a lifetime of festering wounds. She lunged again. He grabbed her wrist, and they crashed into the wall, picture frames rattling violently. She clawed at his face, screaming words he couldn't even understand, half sobs, half rage, all desperation. The knife clattered to the floor, but Marjorie didn't stop. She had the strength of someone with nothing left to lose, fueled by terror of losing the only person she believed belonged to her. Tyrese shoved her, not hard enough to hurt her, just enough to break free. But she was standing on the corner of a throw rug, and his push sent her foot sliding. She stumbled backward. Her arms flailed. For a moment, time slowed enough for Tyrese to think he could catch her. Then, crack! Her skull struck the wooden molding of the hallway. Silence swallowed the house. The knife lay inches from her hand. Her fingers twitched once, then fell still. The only sounds left were Tyrese's ragged breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. He sank to his knees beside her. "Grandma," his voice broke. "Please get up. Please." But she didn't move. In that moment, the boy inside him, the child who once trusted her more than anyone in the world, felt something fracture deep inside. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was simply empty. A hollow ache blooming wide in his chest. For 15 minutes, he stayed there, kneeling in the hallway, bleeding, numb, staring at the woman who raised him, loved him, warped him, destroyed him. Finally, he stood on shaking legs, wiped his blood-smeared hands on his jeans, and walked out the front door. The world outside was strangely normal, a neighbor watering roses, a dog barking in the distance. No one had any idea that behind the yellow door of the Hale home, a lifetime of twisted love had just ended with a single push. And for the first time in his life, Tyrese realized he wasn't safe there. He never had been. The patrol officers who found Tyrese Hale wandering down Sycamore Lane that night didn't know what to make of him at first. He was shirt torn open at the shoulder, blood smeared across his arm, eyes glassy like he'd just crawled out of a nightmare. When they asked what happened, he didn't speak. He just whispered one word, barely audible over the hum of passing cars. Home. Inside the Hale house, the smell of copper hit them before they even reached the hallway. Marjorie lay motionless beside the wall, her silver hair fanned out, the hardwood beneath her head stained dark. A kitchen knife glinted on the floor. Officers froze, not because it was gruesome, but because the sight didn't match the woman they all knew. One of the responding officers had eaten Marjorie's pecan pie at last month's church bake sale. Another had grown up down the street and remembered the way she'd taped dollar bills inside birthday cards. To them, she wasn't supposed to be dead, and Tyrese wasn't supposed to be the one standing over her. Within the hour, Detective Serena Boyd arrived. She'd handled enough cases to recognize trauma when she saw it. Trauma, not guilt. Tyrese sat in the cruiser, wrapped in a blanket, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Serena crouched beside him, speaking softly. "Tyrese, you're safe. I just need to know what happened." His lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, tears streaked silently down his cheeks. It was enough for her. Kids who were lying usually talked too much. Kids who were broken fought to get a single word out. Inside the house, the forensic team documented everything. The broken picture frame from the struggle. The trail of smeared blood down the hallway. The angle of Marjorie's fall. And the medical papers Detective Boyd found tucked neatly in a wooden box in her bedroom. Papers revealing she had been HIV positive for more than a decade. Pieces of the story were falling into place faster than anyone expected. By morning, Richmond was buzzing with whispers. The grandma of Sycamore Lane, the woman who made blankets for cancer patients and led prayer circles, had died violently. Police cars outside her home, yellow tape on the porch, neighbors clutching robes and smartphones, whispering to each other in shock. Some insisted there had been a break-in. Some swore Tyrese must have been defending her from an intruder. No one believed what Serena already suspected, that Marjorie herself was the threat. Camille rushed back from her shift, frantic, sobbing when she saw the ambulance. When she learned her son had been taken to the hospital for his wound and that her mother was gone, her knees gave way. Serena steadied her gently, explaining the situation in pieces, not everything at once, just enough for Camille to process without collapsing. At the hospital, a nurse quietly asked Tyrese whether he had anyone he wanted in the room with him. All he said was, "My mom." He didn't mention Marjorie. He didn't ask if she was okay. That was the moment Camille realized something terrible had been living under her roof. Over the next 48 hours, Serena interviewed Tyrese, Camille, teachers, neighbors, church members, anyone who knew the Hales. The picture that emerged was painfully consistent. Marjorie had been overly involved, overly protective, overly attached. No one had seen it as sinister, not until now. The autopsy confirmed what Serena feared. Marjorie had died from blunt force trauma consistent with a fall. No defensive wounds on Tyrese. No signs he attacked her. But the medical examiner added something else. She was untreated HIV positive. For a long time, when Tyrese finally gathered the strength to talk, he told Serena everything. How he found the documents, how she came at him with a knife, how he pushed her only to escape. By the time he finished, Serena's pen had stopped moving. She didn't need notes anymore. She believed him. Word spread quickly. Not the official details, but the rumors. In small towns, truth travels slowly. Whispers travel fast. The community fractured overnight. Half the town refused to believe Marjorie was anything but a saint. The other half began to question every memory they had of her. Congregation members cried outside First New Hope Baptist. Neighbors who once adored her now avoided looking at the Hale house altogether, because nothing was more terrifying than realizing a monster had lived among them. And they had baked cookies for her, prayed beside her, trusted her. And in the middle of that unraveling town sat Tyrese, bruised, grieving, infected, and carrying a truth no teenager should ever have to speak. The investigation wasn't over, but the world he knew was. The town was still choking on disbelief when Detective Serena Boyd received the call that changed everything. A cleaning crew preparing Marjorie's house for sale had found a locked metal chest hidden deep in the attic, wedged under insulation thick with dust. The moment the crew chief said the words "old DV tapes," Serena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Nothing good ever came from tapes hidden in attics. She drove straight to the Hale residence, the property now stripped of its warmth. No flowered curtains, no humming appliances, no smell of lavender. Just an empty house echoing with truths no one wanted to face. The chest was small, dented, and rusted at the hinges. Inside were 8 mini DV tapes, each labeled with dates ranging from 2006 to 2011. A few had handwritten stickers, Ty's 4th birthday, Christmas, summer. At first glance, they looked like innocent home videos. Serena's instincts told her otherwise. Back at the station, she had them digitized. She watched alone. By the 5th minute of the first tape, Serena paused the screen, leaned forward, and whispered, "Oh, God." The videos didn't show explicit acts. Marjorie had been careful, but they showed enough. Too much. Late-night recordings of her brushing little Tyrese's hair while whispering praise in a tone far too intimate. Shots of her adjusting his clothes, touching his face, lingering in ways no grandmother ever should. On another tape, she kissed him on the mouth, slow, deliberate. Tyrese was 4. In another, she talked to the camera in a kind of diary entry. "He's my gift from God, my second chance. Camille doesn't understand how to love him right, but I do. I was chosen to raise him." That line replayed in Serena's head long after the footage stopped. The most disturbing tapes weren't even the ones with Tyrese. They were the solo videos. Marjorie sitting at her kitchen table, cardigan perfectly buttoned, speaking to the camera as if it were a priest hearing confession. "I lie awake, sometimes wondering if it's wrong to love him this much," she whispered in one. "But then I think, no one will ever love him like I do. No one." When Serena finished the last tape, she turned off the lights in the viewing room and sat in the dark for several minutes. She'd seen trauma, assault, cruelty, but this was grief disguised as love, obsession dressed as holiness. And it was filmed like a memoir. The next question was unavoidable. Did anyone else know? 3 days later, that answer arrived in the form of Angela Pierce, Marjorie's niece, quiet, polite, nearly forgettable, who walked into the courthouse with a lawyer and a briefcase. She'd filed paperwork claiming full control of Marjorie's estate, citing power of attorney, signed just months before her death. She also presented a trust document, executed 3 days prior, transferring all assets to herself. Serena's jaw clenched. "And the grandson?" she asked. Angela cleared her throat. Marjorie didn't think inheriting the home would be good for him emotionally. Convenient. When pressed about her relationship with Marjorie, Angela admitted she visited frequently, helped with bills, picked up medication, and managed sensitive paperwork. Sensitive. That word set off every alarm. With a court order, Serena pulled phone logs, bank transfers, prescription histories. Angela's fingerprints were everywhere. She'd renewed Marjorie's antidepressants, picked up her mail, and, most concerning, requested replacement keys to the house 2 months earlier. But when Serena asked about the tapes, Angela shifted uncomfortably and said something that made Serena's blood run cold. "I found one tape years ago, but she said it was therapy work. Role play." I believed her. That lie cracked open everything. A search warrant for Angela's home turned up cleaned hard drives, shredded documents, and a USB labeled bills and taxes, which, when forensically restored, contained fragments of handwritten drafts. Letters. Suicide notes. Multiple versions. Some phrasing matched Marjorie's final message to Tyrese. Some did not. Angela hadn't just known. She had helped craft the narrative. When confronted, she broke. In a trembling voice, she admitted she'd confronted Marjorie in 2018 after finding one disturbing tape. Rather than reporting it, she handled it quietly to keep the family from falling apart. As the years passed, she became entangled in covering small things. Missing mail, unexplained medical bills, odd withdrawals, until silence turned into complicity. "I thought I was protecting Tyrese," she cried. Serena slammed her notebook shut. "You were protecting Marjorie." In the following weeks, the story detonated across town. The church board panicked. Neighbors held emergency meetings. People who once adored Marjorie now claimed they always felt something was off. That was a lie, too. They didn't see because they didn't want to, but the tapes forced them to. By the time the district attorney finished reviewing the evidence, one truth was undeniable. Marjorie was not a lone monster. She had help. She had silence. She had a whole community that worshipped her mask. And Tyrese was the one who paid the price. When winter finally loosened its grip on Richmond, the world felt softer, quieter, almost gentle. But nothing inside Tyrese Hale felt gentle. Healing rarely arrives like sunlight. It comes in small, fragile pieces, carried by strangers, counselors, and the quiet hours when you're finally too tired to run from your own thoughts. After weeks in a youth trauma center, Tyrese had learned one difficult truth. He wasn't broken. He was wounded. And wounds, no matter how deep, could be tended. At first, he barely spoke in therapy. The counselors didn't push. They let him draw, write, sit silently with a blanket around his shoulders. Sometimes he'd stare at the window for a full hour, watching leaves shiver on the branches. Other kids recognized that look, emptiness mixed with a fear of being seen. Pain has a way of recognizing itself. Slowly, he found small anchors. A hot cup of cocoa in the morning. The counselor who said his name softly, like she was returning something that had been stolen from him. The boy in the center's art group who sketched birds with broken wings, but drew them as if they were still trying to fly. Tyrese wasn't ready to talk about her. Not fully. But he talked about the boy he used to be. The one who loved drawing comic heroes. The one who wanted to play college basketball. The one who used to believe his family was unshakable. Healing began there, with the boy before the trauma. Meanwhile, Richmond was going through its own kind of unraveling. Marjorie's tapes forced the town to confront its collective blindness. The same neighbors who once praised her pies and church hats now avoided the subject entirely, terrified of their own guilt. The church took down her memorial plaque. The community charity group removed her name from its scholarship fund. People said it was respect for the truth. Tyrese knew better. It was shame. One quiet morning, Detective Serena Boyd visited him at the center. She placed a small evidence box on the table, digitized copies of the tapes, the trust documents, fragments of the suicide note drafts. "You don't ever have to open this," she told him gently. "But it belongs to you, not them." He didn't touch the box. Not then. Not for days. But the gesture mattered. For the first time, someone wasn't defining the truth for him. Someone was giving him the right to own his story. As months passed, his world slowly widened again. He began taking community college classes. He helped younger kids who arrived at the center trembling with their own secrets. A 14-year-old boy named Malik once asked him, "How did you survive it?" Tyrese sat beside him on the courtyard bench, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, and answered honestly, "I didn't survive it alone." That became his quiet mantra. He didn't forgive Marjorie. He didn't hate her either. What he felt for her was something heavier, like standing at the ruins of a house you once called home. You don't want to rebuild it. You just want to walk away and never hear it collapse again. Spring finally arrived when Tyrese returned to Charleston for the dedication of the new Carter House Youth Trauma Center, funded by Angela's restitution and built in honor of the kids hurt by silence, not by Marjorie. Neighbors whispered as he stepped on stage, but his voice never wavered. "You all called her a saint," he said quietly. "I knew her as something else, but I'm still here. And maybe that's the real miracle." There was no applause, just a heavy, communal exhale. Truth is rarely something people clap for. It's something they sit with. After the ceremony, Tyrese didn't join the crowd. He called a cab and asked to go somewhere he hadn't visited since the night of the incident, the cemetery at the edge of town. Marjorie's grave was unmarked except for her name. No flowers, no scripture, just a slab of stone over dirt. He stood there, hands in his pockets, feeling nothing and everything at once. "I thought I'd feel anger," he murmured. "I thought I'd feel relief. But this is just goodbye." He knelt, placed an envelope on the headstone, a sketch he had drawn weeks earlier at the center. A little boy holding hands with a woman in a lavender cardigan. But in this drawing, the boy had finally let go. Tyrese stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and took one last look. Not out of longing, but out of closure. Then he turned around and walked away. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes. The wind carried the quiet. And for the first time, not just since the attack, but in his entire life, he felt the past trailing behind him instead of dragging him down. Healing wasn't a finish line. It was a beginning. And Tyrese Hale finally stepped into it.